You gotta love the familiar sounds of Zoom. You're an IT guy too, right?
Yeah, I've worn many different hats over the years. When I was in Denver, I had the lofty title of configuration release engineer in a past life. And, I pushed code in wee hours of the morning. And I got burnt out and hiked across Utah where I met Joan. And I avoided it for 2 years, then COVID hit. So I went back to my IT monkey roots and kind of a
Uh,
jack of all trades IT guy for a small manufacturing company here. Frankly, the work is what I did 15 years ago, but it's pretty low stress overall. And having a full-time job in Moab doesn't involve the tourist industry, and I work from
sure.
home, so could be a lot worse. And Joan has for unusual for a park ranger, she has a pretty stable schedule. She has every other Friday off, and I have every Friday off. So we're 3 or 4 nights a week. We're out camping and backpacking.
First and foremost, I've heard on the trail show, I've heard your name pronounced so many different ways. Say Magnanti for me.
Manyanti.
Magnanti. Okay. So it's
That's
Paul PMags Magnanti.
Yes, that's the original Italian pronunciation. You'll hear Americanized, the Magnanti. Hence Paul Mags for short. It's a lot
Yeah,
easier
sure.
going back
Sure.
to at least my grandfather.
So outside of the IT stuff, you've done a bit of guiding, right? Um,
Yes, guided here. I guided for Andrew Skirka
sure.
backcountry. That's probably the more well known. I guided here locally. As I said, COVID changed a lot, not just for me, of course, but certainly impacted the guiding. But did a lot of
Yeah, absolutely.
day hike, somewhere between backcountry guiding and day tours. I don't know what to call it, but this is delicate art transformed X amount of million years ago. You're a very typical
Sure.
book a local guide, take them to arches or canyonlands and show them some things type. So it was
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
yeah, it was. Glad I did it. Having said that, you're more or less on call. Like, oh,
Sure.
there's a client tomorrow. Do you think you're available? I think if I was 20 something and not married, or even doesn't even matter age, if I wasn't in a stable relationship or with a fellow guy, it'd be one thing. But it's getting kind of annoying anyway. So it worked out well in a weird way.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it sounds like a it sounds like it would be an endeavor at times. I think that probably prepared you to write this book. I imagine you saw a lot of fresh faces.
Oh
Um,
yeah, absolutely. I did it. I used to be a volunteer guide, I guess you could call it, back in Colorado. I used to love to do beginner trips. We weren't paid. It was just get people out who've never backpacked. They're new to Colorado. They don't know
sure,
what to bring. I mean, who knows what to bring when you first start out? They think bring the hot dogs to the campfire because they've never done it before. So I used to like to bring out people for beginner trips, and of course, guiding with Andrew for a bit. And my writing on my website over the years and social media has always been more of the practical focus anyway.
yeah,
Get
on
people out.
pmags.com.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh,
Yeah. Um, yeah, so your book, you put it out, it's what, 3 years ago now. I've actually just caught on to it. It's How to Survive Your First Trip in the Wild, Backpacking for Beginners. And
mhm.
like I said, about 3 years ago, I saw the published date. I only ran into it because I've got a couple like thick backpacking field guides that I've bought over time. Oh, this looked neat. Um, and then I pulled one out for Trouble because she's just getting into backpacking for the first time, and I was like as I'm handing it to her, knowing her personality, I'm like, if I actually hand her this 600-page book, she's gonna beat me with it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like, why are there so many pages about tent fabrics and a beginner's
Yeah,
backpacking book?
absolutely. Yeah, 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 exactly that. So the cliche question first, like um, what led you first into the backcountry, and how do you think that translated into you writing this book for new backpackers?
Sure. I didn't do my first backpacking trip to my 20s. Never went on a couple of camping trips in Boy Scouts many moons ago, but one of my first backpacking trip in my 20s, just fell in love with it. ended up doing more and more, did the Long Trail in Vermont, the Appalachian Trail, moved to Colorado. I have IT roots, as I mentioned, which dovetails into this. So I work for a small ISP that did web hosting. So way back in 2004, which is the ancient times, I bought PMags.com and had a very used front page to show you how long ago it was and some basic
Sure.
HTML to get it up and running. And I used it to write about the backcountry stuff. And I always was getting questions from friends. Hey, what's a good place to go? So I wrote an article. Hey, I'm new to backpacking. Can you tell me the different tent types? And I wrote an article. And over the years, that's been kind of my niche, just some of the philosophical stuff, but also bread and butter or macaroni and meatballs, my ethnic background, how to get into backpacking. And a publishing company, Callisto Media is the parent company. They use analytics to figure out what's going to sell for books, quite frankly.
Sure.
And they approached me to write a book. Being at the time more so prolific blogger, I'm able to crank out stuff on this very tight deadline they gave me. And quite frankly, I'm not so well known outside of the niche. So maybe they thought I'd want to break out of that niche.
Sure.
It was a good way to go. So sure, I'll write it. And they had a very specific way they wanted the topics. And I kind of massage it a little bit, but they had some topics in mind. And frankly, the editor really picked out topics I'd be curious as a backpacker because they did their research. And well, they approached me and here I am, wrote a book. I probably didn't publicize it as much as others would, but I'm just not one to, hey, by the way, I wrote a book. That's really
Yeah.
not my strategy.
I mean, I tripped over it by accident. I was just like, what's something easier for her to digest? And I was looking around on Amazon and I was like, I know that name. It was that simple. Um, so it's been out 3 years. If you could go back, you said they kind of set up the framework, you filled in the details, is what it sounds
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
But if you could go back knowing what you know now, post pandemic, everyone, obviously the parks especially have been inundated with more people, a lot of new backpackers. If you could add anything, what would you add to the book?
That's a very good question. Maybe emphasizing more, keep it local to start out. I kind of emphasize that, but especially, I live here in Moab. Everyone wants to go to Arches, which is beautiful for a reason, but there's so many
Sure.
gems locally. Maybe emphasize the local places. Be a hard sell. Maybe backcountry ethics, I think, is an important thing that needs to get addressed now. I did talk about a little bit about LNT, but something even beyond that, as more people go into it. And if you don't know about it, proper sanitation and yeah, more into backcountry ethics, I
Sure.
guess, as much as anything. I think I'd add a chapter of that. And that'd be more, there's no right answer, of course, especially beyond don't litter and that type of thing. But, they talk about the eighth principle now of geotagging versus not giving enough information. You want to be a gatekeeper. So
Sure.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
philosophical.
I mean, I could definitely drink to that. I know places that places that were pristine just a few years ago, as we've had a lot of people come up from the city. Um,
Hmm.
I'm seeing a trail that I go to. I've been up hundreds of times. It's my little exercise trail,
Yeah,
2 3
yeah,
miles
yeah.
from the house. Um, there is, for Easter, people came out with spray paint and spray painted a bunch of trees with everything from phalluses to the Easter bunny. Um, and yeah, I don't know. And you would
Yeah.
have never seen something like that before. I think it has a lot to do with the influx of people.
Yeah. I mean, I think most people know not to do graffiti, so that's really a head scratcher. But
On
what
trees.
yeah, what made them think? I mean, then again, people see aspen carvings,
Sure.
so or birch, depending where you are in the country. But why is that acceptable? And I think it
Sure.
goes back to education. Where I live, of course, we have a lot of the images are 800 plus years old,
Hmm.
and people say with no sarcasm or trying to make some kind of political point, well, they did this graffiti 800 years ago. What's wrong with me adding my name as long as I don't do it on top of where they did it?
Sure.
And if they don't have the education, I wouldn't say they're correct, but it's a fair question if you don't know any better. Well, they
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah.
Why can't I?
There's some valid philosophy there, but I think the core of the matter is you can make your own history elsewhere, Don't cover up someone else's history.
Yeah.
At least
And
that's my opinion.
yeah, and things like that. Or people leave trash behind in plastic
Sure.
bags because if they're new to even the trailheads, well, people come by to pick up the trash, don't they? I've heard that before. And again, they
Oh
were not
yeah.
being sarcastic or trying to make a point. It's just people don't know. So a backcountry
Yeah.
ethics section might have been a good thing to add, knowing what we know now, 3 years later, of course, post COVID, a lot of people new to the outdoors, never mind backpacking, but even day hiking for
Sure.
sure.
Sure. Now, in a similar vein, we're going to test a little bit how well you remember your book. Um,
I'm in
if
trouble.
you,
It's 3 years ago.
yeah, right, you're right. If if you could go back and take anything out, or no, we'll just stick with take anything out. What would you take out of the book?
Again, I was told this is the topics they want. I'd probably emphasize the campfires more. Say save it for
Oh,
the front
sure,
country. Um,
sure,
Kind of controversial. I admit it. Living out west now for 20 years, my views are shaded. But I did grow up in New England. I'm starting to come around to. I don't want to say campfires are banned completely, but maybe save it more for front country, traditional campground type area where there's resources protection and wood available locally sourced, so on and so forth. So I'd probably push back more against the campfires than I did. um, that type of thing. What else would I emphasize? If I could, maybe a little more lightweight backpacking. I had a very um, not that I'm saying people have to take a deep dive, but more maybe minimalist. The fewer items you take, the better. So maybe
sure.
emphasize more of that. Um, yeah, that's probably what I would do.
Yeah, right on. Um, uh, you, I think it's funny that you would annotate more of a minimalist message when you I've seen multiple times on your website. I'm an army veteran, so I wouldn't curse this on anyone, but that you emphasize, um, um, I wouldn't say reliance on, but like don't look over the military surplus is what I take away from your site. Um,
Yeah, I'm not saying take the old. I defer to you if I get it wrong, but the Alice packs of our previous generations and the
sure,
Moly currently, but the Gen One silk, the Layer One silkies, I guess they're called. They're made by
sure,
Polar Tech. Um, they're ugly, as my wife claims, but they're cheap, and it's made by Polar Tech. It's actually good
sure. It's
quality,
good
pretty
stuff.
light. I love a fleece beanie. It's pretty cheap. I'm not saying it's the end all and be all, but it's
Sure,
not a bad option to look at in some cases. Not maybe the combat boots, of course not, but a lot of the clothing was made by civilian. Again, you know more about this than I do, but from my understanding, a lot of the clothing was made by civilian
sure.
manufacturers
Yeah,
for current troops. A different mission, some of it's more durable, but again, the base layers and some of the fleece, it's actually not a bad way to go. The grid fleece, for example, layer two. It's like
oh yeah.
it's cheap, it's light, and again, it's made of Polar Tech. Get it used, you can get $25 for a good high quality grid fleece. That's pretty darn good. Just another
Yeah,
option.
yeah, in a world where people are paying $400 for Cuban fiber backpacks and $1,000 for these insane tents, it's interesting to hear someone with a I wouldn't say a dissenting opinion, but a broader opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly love my Montbell Puffy. I wouldn't take,
Sure, sure,
I don't know what they call whatever the equivalent is, the Primaloft, very sturdy. That's probably overkill and too heavy for what we want to do. On the other hand, there's nothing wrong, as I said, the Polar Tech silk layers are just as good
yeah,
as any other lightweight base layer. So yeah, it's just another tool in the kit. I mean, my stuff I take is everything from cottage gear like ULA to higher ends such as Montbell to thrift store finds like my favorite fleece pullover to the silk weight military layers. And I throw it all in
sure,
a military surplus kit bag because it's cheap and it hauls things to the trailhead quite easily.
yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did. Before I knew what through hiking was, I hiked the Pinhoti Trail in 2014 by accident. A friend of mine told me about it, and I was like, oh, there's a bunch of trails with the same name connecting from middle of Alabama to up towards the Appalachians. That's pretty cool. I'll go hike all these woody sections, not knowing I skipped all the roads,
Yeah.
not knowing it was all one long trail. I ended up
Yeah.
doing what about 250 miles, and I did that in combat boots with
Oh, jeez.
A Molly rucksack and a Coleman tent from Walmart. It can be done, but
Oh,
I'll say
absolutely. Yeah,
it's
but
heavy. It's very heavy.
yeah, and I think that's why what the book is saying, you don't have to get the
Yeah,
Coleman tent and the cast iron and all that. There are other options out there. Yeah, I mean, it can be done. People have done stuff in blue jeans and probably
sure.
tighty whities. Doesn't mean you should though.
Yeah, yeah. So, some options are more painful than others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, we kind of just answered my next question, so I'm gonna scroll down a little. I wanted to pull that. I wanted to pull up that review I pointed to earlier today.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to pull that up. A reviewer on Barnes and Noble gave you 1 star, saying, "Bad information, poorly written. Contains a lot of bad information for the new backpacker. Paul is very old and uses outdated info to misinform people. If you follow his advice, you could die."
Yeah,
What do you have about this guy's opinion?
I think it's hilarious. I mean, just as a consumer, I almost ignore if I'm going to Amazon to look up a new fan for the house, whatever, doesn't matter. I discount 1 star reviews anyway
Sure.
because they're usually poorly written, much like this one. Um, and in particular, this is a very typical 1 star. Never mind, it's about me, which I find funny. But why is it poorly written? What advice is incorrect? If I'm reading this,
Sure.
this doesn't help me. Um, Old. I mean, okay, maybe I am. I'm in my 40s, but I, okay. I mean, I mean, you could call me middle age. Old is another thing entirely, especially because all the stuff I
Sure.
do. I wasn't insult. I was just again, it's a head scratching comment. I mean, it's just a typical 1 star. My guess is either I don't know, maybe the person is a prepper and wants more
Oh,
hardcore
sure.
bushcraft stuff. I honestly don't know. Could be, as I said, frankly, I'm not afraid to share my opinion sometimes online. Some people don't like that strong pushback sometimes. I honestly don't know, but if I was a consumer and I saw that review, I'd be like, okay, again, what advice is bad? What is he saying
Sure.
that's incorrect? A 2 star or a 3 star review, someone said, the navigation should be more in depth. And, that's fair. But again, it's meant for beginners. I mean, there's some, or maybe, I don't know if someone said this, the first aid should be more in depth. Maybe they wanted more. But just to say it's poorly written, the advice is outdated. That's a pretty useless review. And again, on Barnes and Noble, I'm like, what the?
Yep.
It's probably not a Gen Z person going into Barnes and Noble saying I'm too old. I don't know who wrote it. Who goes to Barnes and Noble? I mean, obviously it's still around, but I go there for the bathroom or the coffee once in a great while in
Oh
Denver or
man,
something.
I just bought books from Barnes and Noble like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh yeah, online I will.
I still like no the from a in store. I like being able to turn the book before I buy it.
Oh yeah, there's
But
still some really good things for that. Of course, in
yeah,
Moab, we're 2 hours from the nearest
sure,
city of Grand
sure.
Junction, which is the greater metro area, is like 100,000 kind of little towns. Um, yeah, we have a small bookstore here in town, which is actually very good.
Yeah.
Um, but it's definitely, especially the Southwest stuff, as you can imagine. But it's not Barnes and Noble, like, you can go in and grab a cup of coffee and look around, thumb through some books,
Sure,
find
sure.
something you didn't think you'd see and buy it. That happened to me more than once.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I like walk it doesn't have to be Barnes and Noble, but I like walking into a bookstore or a library and anywhere where you can sit down, enjoy a book and enjoy the smell. I don't know, that's just something for me.
oh, I agree. I never consider myself moved into a town until I get a library card. And that's
Yeah,
the
there you go.
truth. I again, COVID changed things a little bit. It's starting to open up again a lot more the past 6 months. But before COVID hit, I would spend a lot of time at our local library. It was just nice walking down the aisles, picking up a book that
Yeah.
looks good, and or the librarians are really stoked. They'll recommend some stuff. Yeah, oh, you should read this book. Oh, I've never heard of it. So yeah,
Yeah,
that physical bookstore or library, I totally still indulge in it 'cause I love it.
yeah, absolutely. And our library here in the small town of Cartersville, Georgia, actually has maps. They're not the most up to date maps, but they have USGS maps that you can pull out. I've gone in there, looked up trails, taken pictures, and um, I was very surprised. I was looking up a book and I saw that they had a map section, and I went over there and started looking around, and they had um it wasn't Nat Geo's, it was the other one, the other really common one. Um, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been probably 10 years now.
Hmm.
I don't think it wasn't Gaia. That's electronic.
Print maps. There's the Gazetteers. Were they more of the
Oh,
backcountry
they were similar to the Gazetteers. I remember that. It wasn't those. Um,
benchmark?
it might have been. It might just be too long for me to remember.
Yeah. But some print maps anyway that you can look over, which I love looking at print maps for planning
Yeah,
because you get the wide
absolutely.
view,
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
versus this over here. Like in, there we go.
Yeah. But so yeah, I thought that review was pretty funny. I thought you might get a kick out of it. Um, so I read your book in a few hours.
Yeah.
Trouble's still reading it. She's thumbing through it at work. But let's say, I'm your typical IT guy. I get my fix on the weekends. I finish your book. Um, can't go backpacking this weekend because I'm on call. I've got maintenance. I've got a million things I've got to do. I can't go this weekend. But I want to consume more backpacking media. What would you recommend?
Well, it depends what you want as far as you wanted more education, if you will. Mike Clelland's ultralight tips is amazing. I always tell people to look at that book. It's kind of a similar thing where it'll just distill a lot of the lightweight backpacking stuff. If you want
Sure,
to be inspired, different YouTube. I don't really watch a lot of hiking videos in YouTube, so I really can't recommend any. But
sure,
um, there's something about visually getting excited about it. That is still very good. I always say, well, find an area that really interests you. Some eye candy, especially if you're sick of the education, just want some inspiration. So that's
sure.
always good too. If you want some deeper dives, once you read the book and get some miles under your belt and look at Mike Clelland's tips, um, it's kind of wading in like anything, but the Reddit ultralight forum can be extremely helpful. There's some very knowledgeable people on there. Like any online forum, you have your trolls and your people who have access to grind inside jokes, but
Sure.
it's a pretty well moderated forum. Avoid the Facebook forums for the most
Oh yeah,
part. That's very toxic. Some of the group forums for long trails are different, but that's down the road. But
sure.
for general information, yeah, I would say Mike Cullen's book. If you want more of what I think is the analytical side, Andrew Skirka's book works well. I'm not quite as analytical, so I never gravitated towards as much, but some people like that, and that's a
Sure.
great thing. If you want more of the philosophical side, this goes to what I said before. Um, I call it Wilderness Ethics by Guy and Laura Waterman. It was written in the early 90s, quite 30 years ago now at this point. But the questions he brought up just at the dawn of the cell phone era still apply now. What is wilderness? How much information versus too little information? Um, for more of the philosophically minded person, I think it still holds up. It's one of my favorite books. And it's what I always recommend to people if they want to. I do a lot about the what and the how, as well as many other people. It's really hard to do the why, especially in a book form.
Sure.
The
Sure.
Watermans go into a lot of the why. And the Guy Waterman was extremely well known New Hampshire climber, backpacker, outdoor author. Um, and his writing still holds up 30 years later because it's not gear specific. And the questions he poses still apply nowadays. The technologies change, but the questions technology brings up have not. And that's why I always tell people the how and the what are one thing, but the why, I think, is certainly why I go out. And I always appreciate some good writing from other people who write about similar topics.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm gonna have to look that up. And you, oh man, you brought up Facebook. That's where I got. the idea to do my website is I shuttle people back and forth from Atlanta to Springer every year. Took
Oh,
a few
wow.
years off for COVID, but um, I see it as like a lot of these hikers are just out of high school, just out of college.
Yeah.
They're going through a life transition, whatever. And I'm doing okay. I'm an IT engineer, so I do free shuttles from Atlanta to Springer for 2 months a year.
Oh, wow.
Um,
It's very generous.
you say that you'd be surprised how many people don't take you up on it. But um, one of the things I notice is the repetitive questions between the Facebook groups where I find these people or in the shuttle themselves, just last minute apprehensions. Is this the right pad? Well, you're going to be at Springer in 2 hours, so I hope so. Um, so I started doing my new hiker frequently asked questions, and I felt like your book just took what I was trying to address in a short essay and was just like, here is your starting points for all your answers. Yes, you can go get more information, but this is going to get you that minimum level of fluency to walk comfortably out in the woods.
Yeah, and that's really what I hope people got from it. Because you can take deeper dives, as you know, like what kind of 3-ounce stove versus the other 3-ounce stove.
Sure,
But I like to talk about alcohol versus canister versus white gas. Leave on a high level, those are the three types we'll say. Here's the pros and cons. Why will this one work better for you versus another?
sure,
You might be the Pocket Rocket 2 versus the BRS, pros and cons, but if you get the Pocket Rocket 2 from REI, you're not going to go too wrong, I guess, what I'm trying to
sure,
say, versus your father's old Svea 123 that might not quite work well for modern times.
sure.
And the one thing I always like to emphasize to people too, a lot of these questions, here's the basics, which I would like to think my book will help dial in. But before you do a through hike, I always tell people go backpacking.
Sure.
Um, Try doing 15 miles a day for 3 or 4 days at a time, kind of a through hiker style pace, not over the top 20 plus miles, but not the nice 5 to 10 to make a beautiful campsite, which is perfectly
Yeah,
fine too. But are you comfortable doing a through hiker style pace? And at 4 or 5 days, you'll have a better feel for it. Plus, you get to dial in your gear. Um, you get a You'll see if that type of a pace is for you. Maybe it's not, and that's cool too. Maybe you don't want a through hike, or maybe
sure.
I liked it, but I was ready for my hot shower. I didn't want to repeat it again. Maybe section hiking is better, and that's cool too.
Yep,
And you talk about other resources. Well, I said YouTube videos can inspire you, but if you're just watching YouTube videos of actually backpacking, you're going to get a false feel for what
yep,
this activity entails. And if people took a week of backpacking, if they could, before they made it to Springer, I think a lot of questions and anxiety might be answered.
sure.
And again, it's probably a lot of them more fun than reading yet another book or YouTube video or blog post on backpacking, information overload.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a YouTube channel. You probably heard of it, Homemade Wanderlust. That's
Yeah.
Dixie. She put that out. She put out her series, I think, the year before I started shuttling, and the next year I noticed a lot more. I wouldn't say a naive backpacker because the first timers are always naive.
Yeah,
Period.
absolutely.
Um, but there was I think were an influx of people who didn't understand how high the mountains were or how long you'd be going up.
There's
Uh,
it's car talk from many years ago, but Tom Meliozzi, Click or Clack, I forget which one he was, had this great line: reality often astonishes theory.
sure,
So, they see these beautiful videos. Here's this, I hardly have ever watched Dixie stuff, but she seems very personal, charismatic, and
sure,
really
sure,
great, really, frankly, extremely skilled at giving the information. So
sure,
very polished, dialed in. So people see this wonderful thing, which it is. But as you said, oh, I got to walk 15 miles in the rain, and maybe my pack's not fitting quite correctly because I haven't really adjusted because I haven't backpacked yet. I'm getting sores and blisters. And wow, all that macaroni and cheese I bought months ahead. Wow, that's really tasteless garbage for me personally.
yeah.
I,
Especially when you get Noro before the Smokies. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Actually, I've only heard that one. I haven't hiked enough with people. I've hiked quite a bit of the lower AT, but I've it's just been weekends and sections and stuff like that. Most of what I've done is away from other people or taking other people to the trail. Um, but I'll tell you, I've had people get me sick in my shuttle. Um, so it's just people don't consider that, like, I think one, they just, you can't know how hard it is until you do it, and two, real world things like your home drama, sicknesses, what's going on in the world, even though you're in that little bubble, what's going on in the world is still happening. So it's like, yes, you're in this semi-pristine environment out in the
Hmm.
backcountry, but it is so much more than someone can show you in a YouTube channel. So you're only going to see the best, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, as I said, doing a few days at a time over the course of the flight. In my case, I started my first backpacking trip in '96, went out as much as I could. Had an inkling I want to do this famous Appalachian Trail. In '97, I did the long trail, which took me 3 weeks, gave me a good feel. And frankly, I dialed in my stuff a lot more. So I felt prepared to hike the Appalachian Trail the following year, at least mentally.
Sure.
Had some of that experience. And I realized not everyone, I was 22, 23, had a little more free time to take 3 weeks off. But I think a week's vacation hiking the previous year would do a lot of people wonders rather than just show up at Springer with the tags still on their
Sure.
packs or whatever.
Yeah, that's what we're aiming for right now. I'm going to take trouble probably in the fall to the Foothills Trail, because
Oh,
you,
wonderful.
yeah, you can do that. You can do that in a week.
Oh,
If you need a little bit of trail legs first, but you can knock it out in a week.
yeah.
Um, but she was like, "Well, why don't we go ahead and do that this spring?" And I'm like, "You haven't stayed out overnight before. If I take you for a week long 70-mile plus trek, you're going to hate backpacking from that moment on."
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, there's always the outliers, of they ran a
sure,
marathon right from the couch and they had a great time and they did it in sub 4 hours as their first marathon. But I suspect most people don't advise you to do your marathon right off the couch without
yeah,
trying a 10K and a half marathon, and or at least the equivalent of training. And I would say there's a lot of people here. They've never backpacked before. They did the Appalachian Trail. That's great, but what about the other 5 or 6 for every one of those?
sure.
I mean, you see with the shuttling, and
Oh yeah, yeah. People just I'd say a quarter to a half the people I shuttle are off like Neil's Gap, Knock, Smokies, or sooner.
yeah.
There's that first road. I can't remember the name of the pass, but I've seen people get off. You're talking about like two days into that first road.
Oh, and I feel
Just
bad for
climb a
them.
mountain first. Yeah,
Yeah, because they invested a lot of time, money. They probably quit their job.
and
Um,
heart.
yeah,
Yeah,
emotionally,
yeah,
they get that bus or hitch or whatever to the airport in Atlanta again, have to go home. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I imagine it's an extremely hard decision to make. Say
sure.
their entire lives are on this 5 or 6 month trek. They bailed out on 2, 3, 4, 5 days, or even a week into it. I mean, if they get to Damascus or Harper's Ferry, they realize, oh, this isn't for me. They gave it the college try, but to get off
Sure.
after 2 days, they must have just been really demoralized,
Yeah.
and that makes me feel extremely empathetic and sad for them.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping that my advice could help mitigate some of that, but your book, I feel like would
Oh,
really help
thank you.
people, one, get in the woods for the first time, and two, be a little more comfortable there. Um, I have one more question before I let you go.
Sure, sure, absolutely.
So Trouble and I have been out twice with her gear. We tried to do like a car camping with your backpacking gear, um, and a cold front rolled in. It was unseasonably cold. She didn't like have gloves and a cap and stuff like that, just like a puffy. We were expecting not to go below like 45.
Okay.
So she could stay warm in her tent. She couldn't get out of her tent. We ended up bailing the next day because she would have been miserable. Um,
Smart call.
yeah, absolutely. And then the next time we went last weekend, we went up to the Pinhoti, a place that I've literally camped at just inside a wildlife management area. I've probably camped there tens of times. I've hiked the whole Pinhoti. I hike that section all the time, multiple times a year. It's beautiful. Um, but we were staying 150 yards from the trailhead where we parked. The next day we were going to hike out for 2 days, get shuttled back to the car. But about 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard what I thought it was drums in my crazy sleeping state. And then I look up, I peer out over the hammock because I'm one of those annoying people who use the hammock. But I peer out over the hammock and I see tail lights over at the trailhead out in the distance, and I know my car's the only one there. And I hear doors opening and closing, and then suddenly they leave. They've been there a minute, 2 minutes at most. Thinking, I mean, you have a really great view of the stars up here, but there's no way you popped out of your car for 1 minute to look at the stars. Thinking somebody's come over there and touched my car. So hey, I'm gonna go check on the car. Grab my dog, grab my headlamp, walk over to the car, and somebody pulled down one of my windows, unlocked my car, rummaged through our car. Um, and then I know better than to leave things at trailheads because uh, you get a certain kind of people when you're out that far from civilization, I'd say, or at least a certain kind of unmonitored people. Um, so I came back. Hey, we're gonna have to bug out. I'm not losing my catalytic converter if they come back. So we're gonna have to reschedule this. We're not gonna be able to walk this
Oh,
weekend or
geez.
whatever. So we had that was just 2 weekends back to back. She was feeling a little demoralized about getting out in the backcountry because it's like one thing after another to her. Um, so whether it's our experience or whether it's that kid coming up to their first gap, um, I say kid like they're all kids, but
I hear you.
on the AT or the PCT or whatever it may be, they're feeling down and out. They don't know if they want to keep doing this. What advice would you give them?
Think about it. Just you're cold and tired, maybe hungry. Before you bail out, take a 0 day. Have some good food. Give some buddies at home a call. Um, don't talk to mom because mom will probably tell you get off no matter what, especially if it's like
Sure,
my mom. But a little more seriously, call some friends at home. Take a hot shower. Get that room in the hotel and splurge, and just think about it. Especially when you're no longer cold, tired, and hungry. And because you made a big decision to do this, and
sure,
we all have bad days, especially when you're starting out. So maybe thinking about it when you're in a better state of mind, realizing there will be bad days, but it's going to get easier, it won't ache as much. And after a day, reassess. Now if you still want to get off after a day and you thought about it, realize this is not for me, I want to do something different, that's cool too. I mean, through hiking's not for everyone. Maybe you want to do more trail work, base camp style situation, do trail work. Maybe you want to do more day hiking. Maybe you want to do car camping. Maybe the idea of doing this for 5 months is so overwhelming. So that's another thing. She says, well, let me try it for a month, then I'll go home. So there's a kind of a light, and then you can reassess too. More than one person said they're going to be out for a month and end up doing the whole thing.
sure.
But there's also the reverse of that, which I don't think enough people really look into. You know what? 5 months is just too overwhelming. I'm going to hike a month and do this, and then I'm
Yep,
going to do whatever for 4 months and road trip. So you can turn something that might be, oh my God, I slogged through this because I didn't want to swallow my pride. Oh, I had a great month hiking to Damascus, went through the Smokies. It was wonderful, but I'm ready to do something else this summer. And
yeah,
that's great too. So I guess my roundabout answer is give yourself a day, think about what you want to do, then do it. If you decide it's not for you, maybe a through hike, there can be alternatives to a through hike. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing. Or maybe just, what, I'm not going to do a through hiker's pace. I'm going to do 10 miles a day, and I'm going to get as far as I can with the time I have available. And I'm just going to enjoy myself camping out more and going to towns. And that's cool too. So I guess what will it take for you to be happy beyond a traditional through hike? Maybe it means, what, I'm just going to hitch up to different places because I don't want to do a through. I just want to cherry pick different places because I have the time. So I guess don't quit entirely. Just take a day, think about what you really want to do, and find a way to do it.
sure.
And because I always say, getting out, through hiking, of course, is great. I've done it myself, but I've done weekend trips where I've been tired. I think of a couple Labor Days. We had a big trip in the San Juans planned. I was
Mhm.
tired. Joan took pity on me. She could see how, frankly, tired and beat up I was from different things that happened recently. And we just took an easy weekend hiking and camping and playing a little tourist, and I enjoyed myself. And that's just me, who wrote the backpacking book. So if I
Sure.
can do it and turn some lemons into lemonade, I think other people could too. It's about getting out there, enjoying yourself the best way you can. Might be a through hike, might be a series of day hikes, or it might just be cherry picking different places, or 5 to 10 miles a day and camping and fishing and just having a heck of a time in the Appalachians for 5 months doing it your way.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, to round it out, I will say where we are going out this weekend,
Awesome.
assuming the weather holds up. So she's gonna get that overnight where she has to worry about the bears and stuff. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, well, PMags, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I'm gonna try to say this without getting trail show legal on thrown on me, but with all the words that are fit to be read. That was Mr. Paul P. Mags Mignanti. You can find his book, How to Survive Your First Trip in the Wild, Backpacking for Beginners at barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com. And if you don't mind me mentioning, the latter is free with Kindle Unlimited right now, though I highly recommend getting a paperback copy. I did both. Um, so yeah, definitely check that out.
Thank you.
Um, P. Mags, I appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a great talk. I really appreciate it as well.